Hello students and welcome to the class of World History. Today we are going to talk about the impact of French Revolution. In other classes I have already talked about the causes of French Revolution, what was the event. So today we are going to talk in this class about the impact of French Revolution. Now remember, there are two things. One is the impact and the other is the significance. There is a distinction between impact and significance. When we talk about effect or impact, it is basically what happened next. French Revolution caused certain, it brought certain consequences, and when we talk about the effect or impact, we can talk about those consequences or the changes that took place because of French Revolution in French society, in Europe and in the world. And then there is again significance of French Revolution. When we talk about significance, it is not exactly like impact, but we are talking about what happened because of French Revolution, the wider perspective. What was the significance of French Revolution, not just effect. So in this class, we are going to talk about impact or effect. So as I told you, when we talk about effect or impact, we are actually going to study what happened right after French Revolution or what changes French Revolution brought. So when we talk about changes, obviously the first change was end of monarchy. This was a very important change because for the first time in the world, people decided that the monarch who was authoritarian, who did not care about the growth or development of the people, was no more accepted by the society. French government or the government that came after the revolution was based on the sovereignty of the people. So what do we see? We see a constitutional government. Second effect was growth of constitutional government. So what does constitutional government means? It means that no more a king will be sitting on the throne and decide the fate of the people arbitrarily. There will be a book, some legal code, some rules based on which the governance of the citizen will be done. So constitutional government was formed right after the revolution, this constitutional government tried to bring few important constitutional principles. What are these constitutional principles? First of all, liberty of the people was something which was achieved after French Revolution. No more people had to pay undue taxes to the monarchs and the noble classes. No more they had to work as a serf in the field of the nobles, or they no more had to pay tax to the church. People were given opportunity to grow. Then the next important aspect of this constitutional government was equality. The revolution talked about equality. The privileges of the nobles and three estate was finally banned, or it was revoked in the French society, and it was understood that people should get an opportunity to grow as per their ability. The next important thing that it introduced was fraternity. What is fraternity? Brotherhood. Now, when we talk about French Revolution, it is said as revolution of masses against the nobles, or revolution of republicans against monarchy. So what do we see? People of France came together. They saw, we see unity among people for the first time for one cause. And what was the cause? To create a nation state. A nation state is a state where nation building takes place. What is nation? Nation is made of people. When people come together and they decide upon their faith equally, in a joint platform that is known as nation. So, fraternity, equality, liberty, these were the foundation of the constitutional government which came after this. The most important thing that we study when we study French Revolution, or the most important change that came, was the concept of republicanism was given a concrete shape, especially the Jacobean constitution. Though the Jacobean constitution never came into force in French Revolution, but Jacobean constitution was a truly democratic constitution because it gave right to vote to all. Now, republicanism, or the idea of choosing a ruler by the people, is something that French Revolution established in the French society. So, when you see that after the revolution, the government kept on changing one after other, this government changed because none of the government could fulfill the ultimate desire of the people, that is to bring the true republicanism. Earlier, when the first government was established right after the French Revolution, it tried to keep constitutional monarchy. Later on, Jacobeans came and they tried to draft a new constitution, and then the rule of director. Whatever be the case, even with the changing government, the idea that there should be an elected government became and remained the core or the center of the whole discourse. The third important change that took place due to this French Revolution was end of feudalism and three estates. So, if you know, French society was divided into three estates, and on the top layer we had the nobility and the clergy. They were the minority in the population. They didn't have large population, or they were not majority in the population of France, yet they enjoyed all the privileges, all the government jobs. They didn't pay any tax, they were not involved in any economic activity, but they had the right to take service from the masses, and they also had the right to impose tax on the people. So, this feudalistic structure of the society had ended after French Revolution. The fourth important change that took place was administrative and judicial change. This is a very important change or impact in France. Remember, right after French Revolution, France was no more a centralized administration. During the rule of the king, France was totally brought under a centralized administration. It was the king who used to decide what rules will be passed and who will govern a particular region of France. But after French Revolution, France was divided into departments which can be correlated to current state. Okay? Then these states were further divided into districts, and districts into small blocks. So, this is how France was divided into administrative zone, and further administrative federal system was established. Each zone was kept under a governor or a minister who would work for the welfare of the France. Similarly, judicial change also came because a uniform civil code was introduced in France, and this law was further codified by Napoleon when Napoleon became the dictator in France. So, what we see that no more people were ready to accept law just arbitrarily passed by a monarch. They wanted a proper codified law which will be equal and justifiable to everybody in the society, irrespective of their status or their earning or their creed or caste. So, this was a very important change that came in France. The fifth important change that came in France, I would write it here. The fifth important change that came in France was basically the growth of secularism. Remember, the nobles or the king and the church always worked in close connection in France. Even when constitutional monarchy was adopted in France and it was said that king would be retained and king will not be changed, king used his veto power time and again to stop the state from making laws which would bring the church under the French government, or nationalization of church was taking place during that time. Remember, in the concept of three estate, clergies, especially the bishops, the priests, the pope, enjoyed lot of privilege and right in French society, and people were no more ready to pay tax or to give them services, undue services during that time. So the people were ready to nationalize the church. And what happened after the revolution? When monarchy did not allow it, monarch was removed. He was the whole idea of constitutional monarchy was given up, abandoned by French people. And not only that, the church was nationalized. How? Now the clergies in the Church of France had to take oath of loyalty to France, and not only that, the land that they owned was confiscated and it was distributed among poor peasants. Finally, the clergies were given salary by the government of France. So what do we see? It is the growth of true secularism. Why? Because people were given the right to maintain their religion, propagate their religion, practice it without interference of the state. The state and the church itself was separated in the way that church no more could interfere in the activity of the state or political activity of the state. So it led to the growth of secularism. But then there are certain, we have seen the pros, but there were cons as well. So what was the con? The chaos that followed. So we know that when people are not when there is no rule of law and people are allowed a free hand, a gathering or a crowd is not a civilized entity. It can go out of hand, and this is exactly what we see during Robespierre's reign of terror, where people were guillotined, beheaded, even opposition was not allowed to come up with their debate or discussion against the law passed by Robespierre. And this was a turning point in the French Revolution, when countries like Britain, which prior supported French Revolution, supported the democratic change, now became apparently they became doubtful of the success of the revolution. And Britain also joined the force of all other states, all other kings like Russia, Austria, who were fighting against France to stop the revolution. Britain also joined, because Britain finally felt like revolution had took the turn of a chaotic violence, and Britain didn't want similar end or similar consequence in her within her border. So what do we see? This revolution assured chaos instead of bringing a stabilized change in the society. The next important thing that you have to see is the growth of authoritarianism. Military dictatorship and absolutism. To curb French Revolution, many states like Russia, Prussia, Britain came together to fight against France. During that time, when France was itself under chaos and there was not a single stable government, three governments changed hand one after other. people were utterly disillusioned by this revolution and its consequences. At that time, the only entity that survived this dissolution was the army, which was fighting for the protection of France. This army, in fact, generated the whole idea of nationalism in France, and wherever Napoleon went to defeat or invade new land, you will see even those countries became under the wave of nationalism. They realized, like France, they should also come together and save their border. So you see that military might became very important after this time. People realized that army can be a very important aspect of the state, and a strong army is needed for protecting the border of the state, for economic stability of the state, and for the growth and prosperity of the state. In such a situation, military generals became very popular, and in many states, not only in France, you will see in Germany and Italy also, these military generals who could win war finally came into the state, and they also usurped the power in the state. They became the authority in the state. This was something that came after French Revolution, the military dictatorship or absolutism or authoritarianism that developed after French Revolution. So these were basically the impact of French Revolution. In the next class, we will talk about the significance of French Revolution.